I have a really quick question for you, and I'm curious to know what your answer is. The highway that runs through Valois, what do you call that highway?
Well, we used to call it the 2 and 20.
I'd like to talk about this old man right here.
Everybody called it the 2 and 20. It was just a name. We called it Beaconsfield Boulevard.
Maybe it was Highway 2 that went along there.
A quick search will show you that the road is in fact called Autoroute 20. But this wasn't always the case. Depending on how old you are, you may have a different name for this road.
Well, I call it the 20.
What was it called when you were a kid?
It wasn't there when I was a kid.
If we go back to the earliest articles on this highway, it's clear that it's always suffered from a bit of an identity crisis. But let's backtrack for a moment to see why this highway was built. In the early 20th century, the amount of cars on the roads were increasing at an exponential rate, from 396 cars registered here in Quebec in 1908 to over 100,000 cars just 15 years later in 1923. So clearly we needed some new major roads, because at that time, the only road available to go east and west was Route 37. That's Lakeshore Road. Did you know it was given a number? Did you know it had a number? So 3 locations were considered to build the new highway. Number 1, around where present-day Jaimes is, but they squashed that idea because at that time they knew a second highway was eventually going to be built, so they kept that part clear. Number 2 was redoing Route 37, but it was just too windy. It's starting to sound like Goldilocks and the Three Bears a little bit. And number 3, following the tracks, and that was just right. Kind of. Following the tracks did mean that it had to go through some already established residential areas, like Bowling Green, for example, in Pointe Claire. About 35 houses were going to be demolished, but instead the citizens fought against it, and they had the whole thing pushed north about 150 feet. So by 1942, 80 years ago this year, the highway was finally completed. It's not exactly what you see today. It was only about 22 feet wide with 1 lane going in each direction. And there were little to no barriers. You could pretty much just walk right across the highway. Now, when I said earlier that this highway always had an identity crisis, I wasn't kidding. Starting from the very first articles published in 1935, this stretch of land was referred to as Lakeshore Highway, Montreal to St. Anne's Highway, St. Anne's to Montreal Highway, Trans Island Boulevard, Lakeshore Highway again, and the Metropolitan Boulevard. Even the mayor of Pointe Claire didn't know what to call it. The Montreal to St. Anne's Highway, or Highway 2. Ugh, what a mess. But its first actual official name was Highway or Route 2. Part of the old famous Quebec Route 2, it was a trans-province highway. Route 2 spanning from Quebec coast to Quebec coast. And the names didn't stop there. Eventually, we started to see Route 2 and 17. Then at some point in the late 60s, when the provincial road was broken up into a variety of numbers, the Montreal part of the road was changed to 20. But for some reason, people had a hard time parting with the 2. So they called it the 2 and 20. They being my family as well. Now, from when I was growing up in the 80s till now, at some point, we all mustered up the courage to finally drop the deuce. Leaving just 20. And I can go on and on about more expropriations of land and houses in Pointe Claire being put on flatbeds and moved to Baie d'Urfé, but alas, I've run out of time for this endangered short.